Devotees, good morning from Sridham Mayapur. Welcome to our daily adventures in Srimad Bhagavatam. And today, my name is Madhavananda Das. We're going to continue our discussion called Meeting in Kuruksetra, which actually begins in Vrindavan. And today we're speaking something about how Krishna left Vrindavan. Narayanam namaskrityam naram shaiva narotamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamudurayat vedi ramayanesh chaiva purane bhadate tata adavante cha madhye cha hari sarvatra giyate Mukam karoti vachalam bhangum langayate girim Yet kripa tamaham vande Shri Gurum dinataranam Paramananda madhavam Paramananda he madhava Padunga luchi makaranda Se makaranda panakodi anande bolo hari hari harinka name vandavela parikodi be chakadola se chakadolanga padaye Manamo rahu nirantare Manamo nirantare rahu Ha Krishna boli jiva jao Ha Krishna boli jao jiva Mote udhara radha dava Mote udhara radha dava Mote udhara radha dava Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Reading from Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, the king of all literatures. We've been hearing something about the events that led up to Krishna leaving Vrindavan, and we'll see how much time we have today. We have a lot of things to discuss from Srimad Bhagavatam, from different commentaries on Srimad Bhagavatam, also from Brhad Bhagavatamrta, from Lalita Madhava, and from some little-known books from Orissa called Mathura Mangal about Krishna's departure from Vrindavan. So I want to begin by reading from the 39th chapter of the 10th canto. This is text number 7, which we also read in our last session. These are Krishna's words to Akrura. He says, Distyadya dashanam svanam mayam va somyakangshitam sasjatam varnyatam tata tavagamana karanam. By good fortune, we have today fulfilled our desire to see you, our dear relative. O gentle uncle, please tell us why you have come. And we read from this on Wednesday, from Jiva Goswami's Laghu Vaishnav Toshini, in which he's following his uncle Sanatana Goswami's Brihad Vaishnav Toshini. And he spoke about how he doesn't consider, Krishna saying, I don't consider Kamsa to be our relative. And we spoke something about that in our last session, how Kamsa is not actually the son of Ugrasena, but he was the son of the demon Gobila. And he then says that, I have some desire to see you, and because you've come, one person has come to me with affection from Mathura, then the method for killing Kamsa has been accomplished. What does that mean? We spoke a little something about that sentence in our last session. Krishna, he doesn't need to kill demons on his own, but paritranaya sadhunam. In particular, he wants to save his dear devotees. Otherwise, Krishna says, Mitya sarva haraschaham, that he's death personified, that he can kill all the demons in one snap of a finger. But in particular, he wants to save his devotees. And this is his purpose in vinashaya chaduskritam, in the killing of the demons. So because one devotee has come from Mathura, or Krura, now Krishna has said, yes, now I can do this. We spoke something in our last session about Krishna's mood in Vrindavan, and how that mood was changed when Akrura arrived. And Akrura represented the conception of knowledge, of the Gyan and Aishvarya, the position and opulence of the Lord. And as soon as that entered into Vrindavan, then Krishna had to leave. And he went to Mathura, which is a place of knowledge. And then later he went to Dwarka, which is a place of Varnashram Dharma. So Jiva Goswami continues, he says that Krishna is saying, but I have more affection for my mother and father here than for my mother and father in Mathura. And I need their permission to go to Mathura. So if I take my parents' permission, then I can go. And this is our topic today, the permission Krishna got from Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj, how that happened, and how Krishna left Vrindavan. I'd like to offer a prayer before we begin to Akrura. This is composed by Srila Jiva Goswami. Akruraya namastasmai jena kangso pisevita kuto pi vyajato drashtum sevituscha nijeshvaram. That I offer my pranams, Akruraya namastasmai, to Akrura. Yena Kangso pisevita, he was serving Kangsa, but kuto pi vyajato drashtum sevituscha nijeshvaram. That was just some pretext, and his real purpose was sevituscha nijeshvaram. He wanted to serve as Nija Ishvara, his Lord Krishna. So we're going to hear some little harsh things today about Akrura, if we go that far. And I want to begin by offering my pranams to that great personality. So the Bhagavatam goes on in the 9th verse of the 39th chapter. Yat sandesha yadartam va duta sampreshita swayam yaduktam naradenasya swajanma kan kudumbade. Akrura relayed the message that he'd been sent to deliver. He also described Kangsa's real intentions and how Narad Muni had informed Kangsa that Krishna had been born as the son of Vasudeva, Anakandandubi. In his Laghu Vaishnav Toshini, Jiva Goswami says that here Akrura related the message that he was sent to deliver and his purpose for it. And he also described the cause of the enmity, how Narad Muni had explained that actually the 8th son of Devaki has already taken birth, but that child was taken to Braj. And so then Kangsa, he decided that he would send Keshi and Arista to Vrindavan, and then at the same time he called for Chanura and Mushtika and all the different wrestlers, and he decided we would have a great Dhanar Yagya. That place of the Dhanar Yagya of Kangsa is still there today. I visited several times. It's in Mathura. The Harivamsa Purana also describes this, how Akrura was telling Krishna and Balaram that very happily will go to Mathura tomorrow. The Harivamsa Purana says, very happily. Don't worry, it's going to be it's going to be like a party. And all the people of Braj, they'll come along with their families, and they'll bring the yearly tax of ghee and milk products. And this Dana Yajna will be held. And then you'll get to meet your relatives. You haven't met your father and mother yet, your real father, whose name is Vasudeva, and your mother's Devaki. And they're always grieving and miserable because their 6 sons were killed. Vasudeva is always in pain, thinking about the evil of Kamsa. And the Harivamsa Purana describes that Akrura told them that because of separation from you and because of the terrible things he's gone through, Vasudeva is aged very quickly and he's almost dead. He's very fearful of Kamsa. Sometimes Kamsa is coming and shouting at them, "What happened to the 8th son? How did you get out? What is the conspiracy?" Because as we've mentioned before, Kamsa is a conspiracy walla. He's very fond of these conspiracies. People who are fond of conspiracy are people who can't take responsibility for their own deeds. Tatenu kampam susamikshamano. So Kamsa is such a person, and so angry. Akrura in the Harivamsa Purana told Krishna and Balaram that every day he was coming to see Vasudeva and Devaki, and sometimes he would pick up his sword and he would shout so loud that people all over Mathura would hear him screaming, "And I'll kill you, I'll cut off your head." In the Harivamsa Purana, Akrura says, "Hey Balaram, hey Govinda." Oh Govinda, he addresses him as Govinda because you're the giver of pleasure. You'll see Devaki, her breasts have not been sucked by her son. She's very depressed. She looks like some demigoddess without any effulgence because of her lamentation for her sons. She's staying alive, just hoping to see you. She has so much lamentation. Akrura told him, it's just like a cow separated from her calf, and her eyes are always full of tears. Her clothing is not washed. She looks like the moon being devoured by the planet Rahu. She just stays alive, desiring to see you. But out of lamentation and separation from you, she's become so weak. She doesn't know the effulgence of your moon-like face. She doesn't know what is the purpose of having a son. And Akrura said it's better she had no children. There's only suffering for a woman without sons. You're her son, but you're Indra Nuj. You have qualities similar to Indra. You give fearlessness to everyone. She shouldn't lament. Now, your elderly parents, they've become the servants of others. And for you, they're enduring all this chastisement from the evil-minded Kamsa. And Devaki, she's tolerant like the earth. You have to deliver her. She's suffering so much. Krishna, you should be reunited with the elderly Vasudeva who has so much affection for you. This is Dharma. Dharma samstarpanartaya. You have to do this. He said, just as we heard the story that this wicked snake came in the lake of the Jamuna, and just as we heard you held up a huge mountain as a young boy, just as you killed Arista and the Keshi demons, Krishna, you should deliver your parents. This is your dharma as a son. They're waiting for you. They're suffering in separation from you. So Bhaktivinoda describes that this is a gyan, knowledge of dharma, which is now entered into Vrindavan. Krishna in the Gita, he says that sarva dharman parityagya. Give up all types of dharma. And my Guru Maharaj said this is Krishna's last words in the Gita, because then he says, aham tvam, he says, sarva dharman parityagya, mamekam sharanam braja. And when he said the word braj, immediately he remembered Vrindavan. And Krishna couldn't speak any more Bhagavad Gita. So, Dharma samstapanartaya. Akrura took him away. You have to do this Dharma. You have this duty to perform. The 10th verse describes that after Akrura spoke, the reaction of Krishna and Balaram. Shudva Krura vacha Krishno balascha padaviraha prahasya nandam pitaram rajasa dishtam vijastatu. That immediately prahasya, they started laughing. Why were they laughing? Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his Sarta Darshani commentary. He says that the word prahasya indicates that Krishna and Balaram, they were giggling, hearing this, oh, he's going to bring us there to kill us for this Dana Yajna. But actually what's really going to happen, he's going to die. So then Vishwanath says that Krishna and Balaram told Nanda Maharaj about Kamsa's invitation to the Dana Yajna. But they didn't tell him about everything. They didn't tell him about some of the more confidential matters. They didn't speak to him about how the residents of Mathura were desiring to see Krishna and Balaram. So we spoke in our first session from a little known book called Akrura Samvad, and how Akrura stayed up all night speaking to Nanda Maharaj. And when Nanda Maharaj heard all the arguments of Akrura, he began crying, hearing, because he has such a soft heart, hearing about the situation of Vasudeva and Devaki. And finally, when the sun began to rise in the morning, Nanda Maharaj told Akrura, I have to go to see Govinda's mother. You stay outside here. And Nanda Maharaj went in to see Mother Yashoda, who was sitting in the same place she would sit every day, but that day something was different. Every day Mother Yashoda would have her Bala Gopal on her lap. But that day, when Nanda Maharaj entered into the inner part of the house, he saw Yashoda by herself. And Yashoda had her head hung down, and she was crying. And Nanda Maharaj could understand that Yashoda heard the news about the coming of Akrura and his purpose in coming, and that he'd hidden, Mother Yashoda, she had hidden Krishna. And so then Nanda Maharaj began a very, very difficult task to convince Mother Yashoda that Krishna and Balaram must go to Mathura. And he spoke so many things to her, and he told her, we can trust him. He's the son of Yajnavalkya Muni, Akrura. And he's also inviting me to go. I'll go. Don't worry, I'm not going to let anything happen to our boys. And I solemnly promise you, Yashoda, I'll return with Krishna and Balaram. So finally, after so many words, Nanda and Yashoda came outside of the house. And when they arrived outside of their house, they found that all the residents of Vrindavan had gathered there together. All the elderly gopis and cowherd men, all the young gopis, all the cowherd boys, and also all the cows and all the domestic animals. They'd all gathered there together, standing there, waiting. And when they saw Nanda Maharaj and Mother Yashoda come out, and Mother Yashoda had Krishna in her hand, initially they couldn't even speak. The residents of Vrindavan just stood there silently and stared. They felt they had no right to question Krishna's parents. And Mother Yashoda was crying and crying streams of tears. Sanatana Goswami in Brhad Bhagavatamrta describes then, at that time, Mother Yashoda turned to Nanda Maharaj and she spoke the following words. Pravochanandam cha tavapi haste yasto maya prana danadi koyam kutrapa visvasya nidhaya parshve tvaniya deo bhavata kore me. Pravochanandam cha tavapi haste. She told Nanda Maharaj, now I'm putting the hand of my son in your hand. And this son of mine, haste nyasta, I'm giving you his hand. Moya prana dhana adika. My son is more dear to me than my life and my wealth. I'm giving him to you. Avisasya. Because I believe, Nidaya Parshve, that you're going to return him very quickly. And you're going to bring his hand and put his hand back in my hand again. And she said, you don't trust anyone else. And saying these words in front of all the Brijbasis there, Mother Yashoda put the hand of Krishna in Nanda Maharaj's hand. And Mother Yashoda then fell to the ground like a banana tree that had been cut at the base. And Nanda Maharaj, seeing his dear wife Yashoda fainted on the ground, immediately he picked her up and began to fan her. And Yashoda regained external consciousness, and she looked around and saw the Brijbasis, and she looked in the face of her boy Krishna and looked at Nanda Maharaj, and she could see the chariot of Akrura, and Yashoda fainted on the ground again. And again Nanda picked her up and brought her back to external consciousness. Again she opened her eyes. Again she saw Krishna and the chariot of Akrura, and again she fell unconscious. And this happened over and over again. When all the Braj Gopis saw this, suddenly all of them began to cry and wail. And all those Braj Gopis, the elderly Gopis, they began to complain to Yashoda. Yashoda, what are you doing? And then Yashoda, who's a very, very simple person, she just repeated the words of her husband, who she trusted. No, my husband, my pati, he's promised that he's going to take care of Krishna. And very soon he's going to return. That Akrura is the son of the sage Yajnavalkya. And he can't tell a lie. Krishna will be taken care of. But when Yashoda spoke these words, which somehow had convinced her, the words that she'd heard from Nanda Maharaj, her words had no effect on those gopis. And they just began to cry louder. And Sanatana Goswami describes then the words of the gopis of Vrindavan to Mother Yashoda. Re nidhaye re dishana vihine vatsam nijam vyagra kore samarpya shaktasi darharam idam praveshtum riktam griham tena katam tvameka. They address her in a very, very harsh way. Those young gopis of Vrindavan, they have so much love for Mother Yashoda. They can't even ever think of offending Mother Yashoda. But now they're speaking to her in a very harsh way. Re nirdarye. Nirdarye means a woman who has no mercy. Oh, merciless woman. Dishana vihine. You have vihina, you have no good sense. You have no brain. Vatsam nijam, you're taking your baby calf. In Vyagra Koisamarp, you're putting it in the hands of the tiger, Kamsa. You're coming out of this house and putting the hand of your Gopal in the hand of Nanda Maharaj to be taken to this tiger in Mathura. What is the value of your house now? Shaktasi daharamidam praveshtum. Your house deserves to be burned to the ground. Your house has no meaning. Praveshtam riktam griham. How are you going to enter into that empty house again without your Gopal? And Mother Yashoda was crying and crying, and she said, listen, I know very well that if a wise person is giving something to take care of, there's no chance of it being lost or damaged. My husband, who's the king of Vrindavan, he's your king. Indirectly she's speaking. He's a wise man. And Akrura is a saintly person. He's famous as a Siddha Mahatma. I've put my son in their hands. They'll honor my request. They'll soon bring him back to me. Seeing the situation, that it was very, very tense, Akrura immediately put Krishna and Balaram on the chariot. And he began to move the chariot. But then, just to check that everything was okay, Akrura turned to look back to make sure that Krishna and Balaram were still there, but he saw that Krishna was gone. Not knowing what to do, Akrura then turned to Balaram. Please help me. And Balaram took him, and they began to follow the footprints of Krishna, which went away from the chariot in the direction of the Jamuna River into a solitary kunj on the bank of the Jamuna, where Krishna was alone with the gopis. Seeing the situation of the gopis and their lamentation, Krishna couldn't tolerate leaving. And so quickly he jumped off the chariot and he ran to console the gopis before he left. At that time, Akrura, seeing the situation, he stood outside the kunj. He put straw in his teeth, which is a sign of humility and utter desperation and appealing. And he began to loudly appeal to the gopis. Please, oh dear gopis of Vrindavan, the lives of Devaki and Vasudeva are at stake. They're Krishna's parents. If Krishna doesn't go to Mathura, Kamsa will kill them. You have soft hearts. Please save the lives of Vasudeva and Devaki. And the gopis responded, Hey, hey, Mahadurta, Mishapalapaka. Hey, you Mahadurta, you thief, liar, Mishapalapaka, you servant of Kamsa. Krishna is not the son of Vasudeva and Devaki. Krishna is the son of Nanda and Yashoda. For that Krishna, the gopis said, we left our homes and went to the forest. The forest became our home, and our homes became the forest. For Krishna, our enemies became our friends, and our friends became our enemies. Poison became nectar, and nectar became poison. Without him, we'll die. And the gopis made so many appeals. And Akrura, then he spoke in a piteous way. Hey Krishna, you're Dharma Samstapana. You're the establisher of Dharma. How can you see How can you allow Vasudeva and Devaki to be killed by Kamsa? It's your duty as their son. And Krishna didn't say anything, but he turned his face away from the gopis. And Krishna went with Akrura. And the 27th verse of this chapter describes Anarjadya esha samastito ratam tam anvami cha tarayanti dharmadaha gopa anobi stavirai upekshitam daivam shanadya pratikula mihate. Sridhar Swami, in his commentary on this verse, describes that this verse describes the words of the gopis. And they're speaking about Krishna, and they address Krishna as Anarjadi, this hard-hearted Krishna. Now, Samastita Rata, he's gotten onto this chariot. And now, Tam Anu Ami, all of these very, very Dharmada, these foolish Dharmada Gopa, these foolish cowherd people, they're following Krishna. And even the elders, Stairivai, Apekshitam, they're not doing anything. They're not stopping him. They said, Daivam chanodhya pratikula mihate. Today, Daiva, fate, is against us. The gopis, Sridhar Swami says in his Bhavarta Deepika commentary, they were thinking, these foolish cowherd men, they're not trying to stop Krishna. Don't they realize they're committing suicide? They're helping Krishna to go to Vrindavan. And they're going to have to return to Vrindavan. And they're going to die in his absence. The whole world has become mad. Sanatana Goswami in Brhad Bhagavatamrta, he says that Balaram was present and he could have expertly pacified the Brijbasis, just as he had done previously when Krishna seemed to be in danger from the snake Kaliya. At that time, Balaram, when some of the boys came running in to tell Mother Yashoda that Krishna was wrapped in the coils of Kaliya and we don't know if he's going to live or not. At that time, Balaram laughed, Sanatana Goswami says. And he explains. Sanatana Goswami says that Balaram laughed to pacify them. Don't worry. Krishna, who is this insignificant snake? And Sanatana Goswami says he was also laughing because Balaram's thinking, I'm Ananta Sesh. And now, and Krishna never plays with me, but he's playing with this insignificant worm, Kaliya. And so he was laughing, understanding that this is the only thing I can do now to save the lives of the Brijbasis. Balaram smiled and laughed at that time. And indeed, the Brijbasis gained some hope at that time. And Sanatana Goswami says that Balaram could have done this at that time when Akrura was taking Krishna and Balaram away. But for some reason, he made no such attempt. Because Balaram could understand the desire of Krishna, and that it was Krishna's desire to leave Vrindavan. It was Krishna's desire to plunge the residents of Vrindavan into an ocean of suffering and separation. Sanatana Goswami says that when Akrura approached Balaram and spoke to him about how Vasudeva and Devaki and all the members of the Yadu dynasty were suffering and were afraid and living under the rule of Kamsa, it was Balaram who gave his consent, who said, it's okay, you can take Krishna away to Mathura. And if Balaram hadn't given his consent, Sanatana Goswami says, Krishna might never have left Vrindavan. We should think deeply about it. why Balaram is behaving in such a way. There's no difference between Balaram and Krishna. Balaram understands the heart of Krishna. Sanatana Goswami speaks about this in Brhad Bhagavatamrta, but Rupa Goswami also speaks about this in the third act of Lalita Madhava. In the first scene, Brinda Devi, she speaks to Purnamasi. She says, "Hey Bhagavati, O noble lady, Matya Manasyeva Maham Bonider Gambiram Kam Api Kolahala Samrambham Akarnya Sambram in Agastas Mi Tat Kachyatam Kim Itaditi." She said there's this great sound. Kolahala, this very terrible sound of roaring like from the depths of the ocean. He uses an interesting word, Rupa Goswami. He uses the word Gambira. Sometimes we comment that our Goswamis, how is it that in their literatures they speak only very little about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? But we raise the point, how is it possible for them not to speak about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? How is it possible for someone who had association with His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada? How is it possible for that person to ever forget that association? How is it possible for them not to always remember Prabhupada and speak about him? To see such an amazing personality. So how is it possible that Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami would see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Gambira, would see his situation in Jagannath Puri, and they would just forget about it? They would go to Vrindavan, now we forgot all about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we're just writing about Braj Leela now. It's not possible. The word sanskar, Sanskrit word sanskar, means impression. Perhaps it's the word we get our word scar from. Because a sanskar makes a deep impression. When you go through something, when you live through something, how is it possible? They must have had such a deep, deep sanskar. It would have scarred them for their life. But understanding the inner desire, the manobhishta of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they didn't directly speak about Gaura Leela. But if we read the works of the six Goswamis with a magnifying glass, like Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective, and we look carefully, we'll see words like the word in this verse, Gambiram. Gambira here refers to the depth of the ocean and how there's this roaring sound coming from the ocean. Brinda Devi says, "My dear Purnamasi, I hear this terrible sound like the roaring of the ocean. Like Gambira Kolahalas, tumultuous sound coming from the depths of the ocean. What is this sound? Katyatam Kemitaditi, what is this sound?" So Rupa Goswami here is evoking another Gambira and another sound which also took place there in Jagannath Puri, in which Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami describes was the madness, the unmadana of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is exactly like the madness of Srimati Radharani. And so Rupa Goswami uses this word Gambira. He gives a little clue. This is the same thing which is going on in Jagannath Puri and in Vrindavan. Purnamasi, at that time she says, "My dear daughter Brinde, Putri Brinde, Nedam cha te karnayo." Hasn't this entered the courtyard of your ears, this sound? And she said, "Yesterday, when Krishna was crowned with a peacock feather, returned to the Braj village after killing the demon Keshi, who became so angry when Aristasura was killed. Akrura, who had been sent by Kamsa, arrived at the palace of Nanda Maharaj. And in the morning when the sun rises, Akrura is going to take Krishna and Balaram to Mathura. When Vrindadevi heard the words of her mother, Purnamasi, she was quiet. And her breath exited her body like steam coming from a pot. A very deep, long, unhappy sigh. And she said, if Akrura takes Krishna to Mathura, then for what purpose will I beautify the groves of Vrindavan? Why will I grow flowers? Why will I make all the flowers blossom even when their season is out, is past? And Rupa Goswami then describes the reaction of the gopis. Krandantinam pluta virati birbibhyatinam vibhavat kupyatinam asa kridasa kridgandini nandaya hadigdaivam kuvalaya drisam jagratinam samagra vyagrakshinam shanavadabitas tamasiham vyarasamnit. That the gopis, they didn't sleep the entire night. What were they doing? Kandanitam pluta viratu bir. They were just crying and crying and wailing. Vibhavat, out of ecstatic love and out of anger with Akrura. And that long night ended like it was one moment. Labda brahmena harata harisarvarisham vinyasyata cha viraha klamakala kutam ha gandini tanuja mandara buddharena vikshobita pritula gokula sagaroyam. And when Vrindadevi heard the words of her mother Purnamasi, explaining the terrible sound, which sounded like the roaring of the ocean. Some Vaishnavas, they say that the sound of the ocean in Jagannath Puri is the sound of the gopis crying when Krishna left Vrindavan. And perhaps Rupa Goswami is also giving us some clue by describing in this way. When she heard the words of Purnamasi describing the fate of the gopis, and she said, Vrindadevi said, Labda brahmena harata harisar varisham. Alas, by churning the ocean of Gokul, Akrura, Gandhani, he's the son of Gandhini Devi, Tanuja. Hagandhani Tanuja Mandara Bhudarena. He's become like the Mandara mountain. And he's churning the ocean of Gokul. Virahakama Kalakutam. And he's created the terrible Kalakuta poison, which threatened to destroy the whole universe. And what is the Kalakuta poison? Virahaklama Kalakutam. The distress of the separation of the Brijbasis from Krishna. And then Purnamasi spoke to her daughter Vrindadevi, and she said, oh, my child, let's go. Let's go to the house of Nanda Maharaj. And then looking ahead, Purnamasi began to cry. And she said, see, look at Yashoda. Look at her standing there. Krishna's on the chariot. And Yashoda has become so agitated that she can't even think to offer some prayers for her son's safety. She's become so bewildered. She forgot to make a lunch for him. She's just standing there and embracing him over and over again and making the ground muddy. with a stream of her tears from her eyes. Purnamasi. And then she told Brinda Devi that Chandravali, when she heard the terrible news that Krishna was leaving for Mathura, she had a half-strung flower garland in her hand for Krishna. And Chandravali fainted on the ground as if she were dead. And at that time, Padma, her dear friend, took the unconscious body of Chandravali and dragged the body of Chandravali in front of the chariot of Krishna. And then Brinda Devi, she said, "Oh mother, look what's going on. Navaktum, navaktum, pudagamana vartam mudabida, kshamante radhayai, katamapi vishaka prabhitaya, samantara kranda, nivida jadima, sheni birimaha, param karna karni, vyavaritam adiram, vidadati." Looking over Dakshina Preksha to the right, she began to cry, "Hadik, Pashipa, look. Navaktum, navaktum." The gopis, they don't know what to do. Navaktum, they can't tell Radharani that Krishna's leaving. But at the same time, Navaktum, they can't not tell Radharani that Krishna's leaving. And so the gopis of Vrindavan had become stunned. And they're just standing there, next to each other, as if they've lost all their sense. Purnamasi begins to cry. And she says, "Hey, Radhe, previously, when your eyes would momentarily blink because and you couldn't see Krishna for one moment, at that time you would glorify the fish, because the fish, their eyes don't blink." She said, "Hey, Radhe, what's going to happen to you now that fate is taking Krishna to Mathura city?" And now Radharani, who would never even for one moment even give a slight glance at Krishna when she was in front of her superiors, but now, without any embarrassment, she's just standing and staring at Krishna. That Radha is making my heart break. And Krishna is looking, returning the look of the face of Radha, and so many tears are coming from the eyes of Krishna. The Bhagavatam, Rupa Goswami, he describes the words of Purnamasi, that at that time, Krishna sent a message to the gopis. Rupa Goswami doesn't say who the message was delivered by. Perhaps Madhu Mangal or one of the Priyanarma Sakhas. But Purnamasi began to read that message. Etas turnam nayata kirete atimishastamisha bhavi bhavya purna apimoya mangala sangamova itam durgai agavijaniya handa sandani to bud asapasai sarasi jadrisam prana saranga sangha. Krishna's message to the gopis said, "Oh my dear gopis, my dear pious gopis, you're bhavya, you're so pious, meaning there's going to be good fortune. How many anguished nights you may see again before you attain my company." And in this way, he said, Asa pasaya. Pasha means the ropes, the rope of hope. Krishna tied the prana saranga, sangha. The saranga means a deer, and sangha means a herd of deer. And prana means the life breath. Krishna tied up the life breath of those gopis at Vrindavan with his words. And what were Krishna's words? Krishna told them, Ayasya, Ayasya, I'm going to return. I'm going to return. So I want to stop there. I was hoping we would get further than we are today. There's so many very, very beautiful and very deep things on this topic. Our purpose in discussing this is we want to speak about union. But Rupa Goswami says that of the 4 types of union, they're all dependent on the 4 types of separation. And without understanding the depth of separation from the residents of Vrindavan, how is it possible to understand the depth of the feelings of union when they met again in the place known as Kuruksetra? So I want to stop here, and if the devotees have any reflections, Srivas Pandit Prabhu was saying, please use a collar mic. We're using this very fancy, expensive mic, which is better than the collar mic according to everybody else. I don't know. I think maybe I've been speaking too softly. I'm sorry. So if any devotees online, nobody so far has anything, but if anybody has any reflections or comments, we can take that just for 5 minutes. Otherwise, anybody here on a Piney Radha, do you have some comment or something? You can take this fancy thing here and talk into it. Right into it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for this wonderful katha. It was really like a drama, and the heart wasn't involved fully to hear how this difficult part of the Krishna Lila when he leaves Vrindavan. So, and especially for me, it was unusual to hear how gopis, old elderly gopis, they were harsh with Yashoda, although for them Yashoda, the life and soul, they loved her so much and they always support her in everything. But in this particular moment, everybody was so disturbed that Krishna is leaving Vrindavan. So, and it's this particular attitude, it showed it. And also how gopis were, younger gopis, they were harsh with Akrura. And thank you so much for showing how Rupa and Sanatana Goswami, they give these clues, how it's connected with Jagannath Puri. This word Gambira mentioned there gives this connection, how Kirtan and Jagannath Puri is reflection, or not exactly reflection, but the continue of this crying that Krishna is leaving Vrindavan. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful.
Thank you, Anupani. So I want to thank everybody who's been listening today, Madhupati Prabhu and Rishikesh. Rishikesh was saying, is your health okay? We went through COVID, but we're doing fine now. And Subal Sham Prabhu, Dvaita Chai. Krishna Kun, do you have some reflection, something? It's okay. We'll hear something from Krishna Kun. Speak right in.
Just a small thing in connection with this Gambira, this clue between the between Gora Lila and Radha Krishna Lila in the Goswami's literatures. I also really like that point, and how just this roaring sound of the gopis crying is like the roaring of the ocean in Jagannath Puri, and for me this has been a big meditation. It's really beautiful. And the other point that I marred, besides the fact that it's just amazing katha, and when we read Lalita Madhava, what you read is not what I read, unfortunately. So I'm very grateful to you that you opened it up more. But the point that I made was about Balaram, how he could have specified the Brishbasis with one smile, but he didn't do that because he understands Krishna's desire. He understands that Krishna wants to plunge them into this painful ocean of separation. Krishna wants to do this to glorify their love, and Krishna wants to do this to show the complete uniqueness of these Brishbasis, and ultimately to give them pleasure, because in that separation there will be the highest ecstasy. But it's a very painful, very painful, but very sobering thought that you brought up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, I want to thank everybody. Manju Krishna Prabhu takes part so many times. I'm embarrassed to speak in front of you. Rishikesh, Subal Sham Prabhu, and Waita Chandra, and Shivas Pandit, our dear God brother, Natalia, and Abhay Nimoy Prabhu. Nice to see you here. I should speak in this mic, I'm sorry. Nice to see everybody taking part today. Marupati Prabhu, and Mahendra Krishna Prabhu, and Neko and Brajabanita and Natalia and all the different devotees. Thank you for encouraging us. So today is Friday, yes, and we'll be back again with our next continuation of this, Krishna's leaving Vrindavan, on Sunday. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Samaveda Bhaktavinda ki jai, Vancha Kalpadurubhischa, Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha, Patitanam